Morning. It is Wednesday, July 15th, and we are here to receive a transmission about relationships and freedom. I'm calling this talk Free the Self, Free the World. And I wanted to start right off the bat. Those who are live on the line, I'm going to try to make this talk pretty concise, actually, and what I really love to do is answer a couple of questions for those of you who have been working with the inquiry practices around these themes and the looking at these templates I've been creating for you guys. And yeah, any questions that have been coming up for you in the last few weeks as we've been playing with these themes, and certainly any questions that come up as I speak for the next few minutes. And so I just welcome those to come in anytime, and I'll address them after a few minutes. Also worth saying at the top of this talk that I'm about to step into 2 weeks of retreat. I'm really excited for it. I've never done a retreat for quite this long before. And I'm so grateful that I'm going to be able to make the space to do this, and a lot of how I'm making the space to do it while also making sure that you guys are okay is thanks to some of the members here who are going to be hosting silent meditations over the next couple weeks at 7:30 Monday through Friday. And then there's going to be a few other sweet little offerings that you'll see, and we'll be posting about all of that for you guys in the next few days. Yes. Okay. So, meditation, which is this primary practice that I believe so deeply in the power of. If there's anything that's, I don't really believe in panaceas or things that are kind of fix-alls. I think that life is complicated, and we're going to have to learn all sorts of things and go to all sorts of places in order to experience the fullness of a human life in a satisfying way. But if there's anything that is sort of a fix-all, or anything that I just feel like serves us no matter, in all of our endeavors, and really applies to so many situations, meditation is it. And meditation is the art of being with life without trying to change it. And so that we can experience life directly, and we can start to actually also experience the ways that we manipulate things and the ways that we insert untruth into truth. And as I talked about last week, this other practice, this complementary practice of inquiry, is more active. We are really curious. We are trying to dig up revelations. And I am such a devotee of both of these practices, right? I think we need them both. While doing inquiry, I'm somebody who is it's been really helpful for me to use templates. I use templates, I use texts, I use these structures that help me organize my understanding, to help me frame things out and see things with my own eyes and understand my own life through these frameworks. And by working with these, I've become a sort of, you become a kind of expert or an authority on these things that you study, that you grasp, that you understand. But something that I've learned is that being an expert or an authority for others is not actually why I do any of this. It's a byproduct that I can help you guys. It's a byproduct that I can teach this stuff. The real reason why I do all of this is for me. It's because I I have a lot of suffering, right? Because I have a lot of questions, because I have a lot of desire, for freedom from suffering. I have a real desire for healing the places in me that still need healing. I have a really deep desire to be empowered and to step into my fullness. And my value here, I can have all these like brilliant frameworks or whatever, you know, I can have all these spiritual texts memorized, but it doesn't free anybody else. It doesn't help anybody unless it's actually helping me. And yeah, and I think some of those themes that I just brought up will sort of weave into what I talk about now. I'm going to show you guys this suffering square again, which we've been looking at for a few weeks, and I want to talk about the very sort of the issue with the suffering square. The suffering square is great as a tool for helping us see our own suffering, and the reason why this square and this sort of grid is such an appropriate shape is because the real issue here is that we get stuck. And just for those that haven't seen it yet, totally fine. You don't have to back up and like look at the other videos or anything like that, because you'll understand it. It's really, really simple. But the idea is that we create these different roles for each other and for ourselves, and it's really natural, and especially when we're in fear, to go into something that's like a hardened ego identity, something that's something where we feel like we know what role to play and we know who to go look for. The issue with this suffering square is that all of the power is limited to this space. So what I mean is this kind of framework creates a scarcity mentality where every human here sees that this is the pie that we got, and I'm going to get whatever slices I want, but it puts me in competition with others. So basically, as I've talked about before, okay, so you've got the savior, you've got the person who comes and saves the day, you've got the perpetrator you got the villain, the perpetrator of the bad things. These two are empowered. These two have power. They, as I say, call them here the subject, but really you could say this axis has to do with, it's like disempowered, empowered. The other axis goes good, bad. And so the savior and the villain have the power to make the objects, right, their favorite, the one who gets the privileges and gets the extra cookie, and you know, and the victim, the one that doesn't get treated well. But in both cases, they are bound by their disempowerment, by relying on somebody else to favor them or not. And so what we tend to do, right, when we're stuck anywhere on this square, we're having a relationship where we're relating from these ego identities, is that the favorite and the victim have to be the victims and other victims, favorites and other favorites, and favorites and victims. Anybody down here has to be in competition. For the power, for the whatever, for their resources, for their needs to be met, for their boundaries to be respected. They are waiting for all of that from up here, right? Savior and the villain are in competition with other saviors, other villains, other beings who are changing things and who are making things happen. And so often people come to me, you know, and say, and, you know, the inquiry that we're working with this week uses the Yoga Sutras template of the Four Abodes to help us get out of this. And people, when they work with this kind of stuff, are always like, well, I'm having a hard time coming up with compassion for somebody who's a victim. Um, that, for instance, right? Or I'm having a hard time having compassion for somebody in my world who I think is creating suffering. Or on the golden, right, or on the other side, it's like I'm having a hard time. Um, I'm having a hard time being grateful for this person, for this person's help, right? Or golden shadow would mean like I'm really attached to this person and idealizing them. Um, and of course, with people who are in favor, or people who have experiencing ease or good fortune, right? So often we want to take it from them. So what I'm saying is that if you're having a hard time having cultivating, you know, loving feelings toward people, chances are you're stuck on this square somewhere. You believe that you are in competition with these beings, right? Um, and the most important thing is, yeah, that you believe that the resources are limited to what's here. Okay. Um, the fact of the matter is, none of us are, we all play all of those, we have all played all of those roles at different times. And we've played many other roles, and we have, these are archetypes, right? These are archetypes that show up in all of the stories. You know, these are the archetypes that show up in our own psyche. These are the meaning, like these, you know, um, prototypes, sort of, right? They're these molds, and they exist. They're real. There's a reality to them. The tricky thing is when we believe that that reality is the total reality. And so what, you know, again, I've got these inquiry prompts that you guys have been working with. I've got some tools for you guys to really dive into this. But in a really simple sense, what we really want to be doing when we're in a relationship that's sticky, that's we're sticking somebody somewhere, and we're sticking ourselves in another place, and we're trying, you know, is to make space, give, acknowledge the the vastness of the human condition, and the human experience, and the human spirit. Give permission for everyone to be able to move in those spaces, right? I mean, when we try to make somebody into an archetype or kind of caricature, right? And that's all they are for us. Um, we let go of the possibility for them to be complicated. We let go of the possibility for them to be changing, meaning some parts of, if you've been in a long relationship with any person, any being, some parts of them have died since you met them, and some new parts have been born and strengthened and cultivated. And if not, then I don't know if that person is feeling so great about themselves, or is evolving, right? I don't know. um but everybody that I know is changeable, right? So we're complicated, we're changeable. There's parts of us that are ineffable. There are parts of us that are dark and unknown even to ourselves, and we are whole. We really are. And so giving yourself and giving others back to that, vastness, wholeness, mystery, complicatedness, changeability, is going to just on its own make space to shift these relationships. The meditation practice, and I've been talking about this a lot in the guided meditations, is really about coming home to the center of your experience, your journey. And when you realize, as you come home to that more and more often, as you recognize your complicatedness, as you recognize your wholeness, as you give yourself space to be all of that, it's going to become easier and easier to remember that everybody else also belongs to their own journey. Now, we do interrelate, and that's really important. And there are power dynamics. There are power dynamics that are also really important. It is absolutely possible to help others, to use your power to help others without turning anybody into a victim and without turning anybody into a favorite. It is absolutely possible for us to go to feel, to be experiencing suffering, right? This is what defines the victim. We don't have to shove, I don't have to, that I can be experiencing suffering and go and find support without making that support person into my savior, right? And I can go to somebody and hold them accountable, or the villain. I can go to somebody and say, this really hurt my feelings, or this really didn't work for me, and I you crossed my boundaries, and I would like to address that, and I don't want it to happen again. For instance, we can do that without making them a villain. And we can work with people who have a lot of privilege, or have a lot of comfort and ease, have a lot more wealth, or have a lot more of something that maybe we eventually would like for ourselves. We can absolutely engage with those people without thinking that we need to take away something from them. And I feel like it's just that in order for me to do that, I have to be able to release myself from my ideas about who I am and who I should be. And it's releasing myself from these ideas of perfection. And as I do that, as I really learn how to return to my center, trust my own journey, I find that that's what I want for others too. And I'm going to go ahead and invite in questions now, if you have them, and I'll just speak for a couple more minutes about some of this stuff that I'm talking about. I think one thing that's really, really important to see is that, in the suffering, okay, so in the suffering square, everybody's untrustworthy. Everybody. Yeah, I know. Like even your hero, who's the idealized fantasy, it's a fantasy. A hero is a fantasy, just like a villain is a fantasy. One's negative, one's positive. They're both fantasy. A villain is a really convenient place for us to shove our shadow, put it outside of ourselves. And a hero is a really convenient place for us to shove our golden shadows, what we call our idealized versions of a self. That person who we could just never be so great or something, right? That if I'm not if I'm not willing to just shove away my complicatedness or my extremes into some other figure, dark and light, um, and if I am, like I just said, also able to I can hold somebody accountable for helping me and say thank you. I can hold somebody accountable for hurting me and say, hey, no, that's not going to work in the future. I can have all this accountability with these beings, but only if I'm not relating to them from that disempowered place. So that means that even when we're calling in help from our support people, we're actually doing it from our center. I could be sobbing and but it's my center that sends out that bat signal to my people to call them in. It's my wisdom, it's my love. And then when my friends come and support me, or my therapist or whoever it is, I'm not making them responsible for fixing me. I'm not making them responsible for saving me. The real fixes come through healing, awakening, empowerment. And no one can do those things to me. No one can, right? And same thing with the villain thing, right? We can make somebody totally responsible for the things for our suffering, and that's never the whole story. Um, so yeah, I think that I'll wrap up this portion of the talk just by saying that when we feel disempowered, it's really important to ask for help. It's really important to say our truth. It's really important to learn how to express our needs and our boundaries. Sometimes it's really important to go get those reparations. Sometimes it's, meaning like sometimes it's really important to go and say, hey, this was not right. And actually, we need to fix it. We need to bring this back into right relationship, back into Aini. And but as soon as we are in a story where we don't have any power, that healing, that awakening, that experience of our fullness, right? There's so much more power actually, right, than exists in this tiny little square, right? Our power is enormous and vast. And we have to be able to seek our empowerment from a place of empowerment, from that seed place. Great, we have a couple of questions coming in. Thank you for those. And okay, and for those of us who do have power, right? And everybody here does over others, and those of us, especially those of us who work with other people or really identify as a helper in this lifetime, really, really important that we recognize that the way in which we help is empowering for others, which means we may not come in and swoop in and just fix everything for love, right? When I do that, and I do that sometimes, it's for me. That's okay too, right? Like, okay, but just acknowledge that. Don't then kind of pretending that it's to save this other person, you know? Um, we want to be able to help others in a way that makes space for them to help themselves. When we step into a role of power, we take responsibility for the good and the bad that comes from that, right? Signing up to, for instance, be a parent. It's like, you are going to be the one who gives them all of these incredible gifts, and you're going to be the one that gives them some wounds. You are. That's how this works, you know? And if you take 100% responsibility, if you want to take 100% responsibility for your child or your student's success, right? Like Lee had a really great meditation earlier this week, was thanking me. And if I really let her, if I was like, yeah, I gave Lee this amazing meditation, I'm really like, really doing great by her, right? I'm really like fixing her. And instead, I said, well, that was, you, we met each other there, right? You've been doing your work and this is your experience. But if I was really quick, right? If my ego, and at times it has been, is really quick to grab that ego candy and go, yes, I'm a hero. I better also be, if next week she has a shitty meditation, I better be able to take responsibility for that too. Right? You see the trap a little bit. Whereas if I can say, it's your journey and I'm your buddy, and I'm so grateful to be walking on this journey with you, and that we can share, and that in these moments of sharing, we have these beautiful discoveries together. That feels more authentic to me. It gives her her path, right? And gives me mine, and shows that we're not like bumping up against each other and nothing's happening. We are influencing each other very much. But each of us gets to stand in our own center, in our own journey. And we each get to want each other to be relating from that place of empowerment. Right. So same thing with our relationships with children, relationships with any place where we say, I'm going to step up and I'm going to offer this. I'm going to be the guide, or I'm going to be the authority, or when we do that, when injustice happens is when someone wants to take that savior role, but doesn't take responsibility for the shitty stuff they do. When we want that power, but we can't actually have equanimity around our own power. We can't see that sometimes I do a good job and sometimes I do a shitty job, and sometimes I do a great job and somebody's still going to have a shitty experience. So yeah, it's all about giving ourselves back to our own center, and giving everybody back to their own center. And the shapes that, and I'm not going to teach this whole template today, but it's one that some of you have seen before, the transformation circle, or the transformation actually is really a spiral, but it's not a square. We're not shoved into corners. It's more like the breath, the seasons. We go in and out of all of these experiences throughout this human journey. And freedom doesn't necessarily mean that we're just totally removed from the challenges of life, right? Freedom means that we feel free to experience life without feeling like we're being stuck, imprisoned, forced to play one of these roles for our whole lives. I'm going to look at the questions. Great. Okay, thanks, Holly. Yeah. She's asking, what are you projecting onto the favorite and victim? She says, I may have missed it, and maybe not. This teaching has been kind of like dragged out over the last few weeks, and so I'm kind of giving you guys these bits. And so I may have mentioned it in a previous talk, but don't worry, Holly. But so we're projecting onto the savior and the villain. They're empowered to bring the savior is empowered to bring all the good, and the villain is empowered to bring all the bad. And we hold them responsible for that. Now the victim and the favorite is interesting. And when we line this up with the Yoga Sutras, the victim is the experiencer of dukkha, of pain. The favorite is the experiencer of sukha, of pleasure and ease. And look at it for yourself, how you project onto the favorite and the victim. But I find that we can either, and maybe I kind of addressed this actually in just that last bit of the talk a little bit, but like, I think that what we can do often with the victim is we can project, really they're all projections, right? And the problem is if we kind of keep that projection onto somebody rather than letting them free themselves from it, problems. But The victim, we tend to project onto them. They're always the victim. This is this person who's just kind of messed up, which is just not true. Like everybody has suffering and everybody has challenges. I think often, and we'll do this with the villain and the savior too. We'll come up with like stories that like make them this way. But for the victim, we often come up with a story that they deserve their suffering, that they earned it somehow, that it's a punishment. This is a really bad misinterpretation of the teaching of karma. And the favorite, we can project onto them all sorts of things, right? But I mean, just think about anybody who you've walked around and either felt sorry for or, you know, whatever. And then with the victim, we can often project onto them like, okay, that is the being that has dukkha, right? This is the being that has apunya, like badness, evilness. This is the person who has suffering. And for a lot of us, we can want to avoid them or avoid being around somebody with suffering. Going through this last year, it's interesting who can show up and who can't. Like for me, like my life kind of fell apart. It's like, and I don't blame any of the people who couldn't come show up for me, but some people just like, it was too much. It was my suffering was like, it blew their minds. They couldn't relate. And it was too scary for them to be around. Luckily, of course, that's not true. A lot of people, and I've had amazing support, but I've also had to kind of have compassion for those who, seeing me as the victim, I think especially because of their ideas of who I am, seeing me in that role was really uncomfortable. And people will react to it how they react. The favorite, of course, we project onto, oh, that's the person who always has ease, always has sukha. So we can project this onto, you know, you think of like sibling rivalry or something like that, right? Like, oh, that person always gets the extra cookie. That person always, right now, looking at white privilege or just any kind of privilege, all the themes of the favorite are in there, right? And we could project onto them, oh, that person is famous and wealthy and beautiful and has it all because they're better than me. Because they're good people. And that's their reward. That interpretation of karma, not how it works. Everybody's got their own path, their own journey. I don't think that I'm being punished by having a lot of my stuff in my life fall apart. I think I'm being freed to walk my path, which just doesn't have a lot of that stuff in it, at least not in this chapter. I don't even know, I don't understand it. But it's not because I'm being punished. And me holding on to that story of like punishment and reward here in the victim and the favorite is something that I've had to really work with. So hopefully that's somewhat helpful, Holly. Yeah. Okay. Great. So I think I'm actually talk to Lee's question first, and then I want to go back to Pam's question. Pam's question about anger. And we can get into some of the challenging emotions that come up as we look at this stuff. Lee's question is, can you talk more about how an abundance mindset offers room to leave the suffering square behind? Yeah. We chant for abundance. What are we really asking for in our relationships? I love that. So in the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali tells us that fear is an experience that accompanies our suffering. That takes something like the dukkha, which would mean like something uncomfortable, or painful, or like owie, and with fear, that becomes transmuted into something much grander called suffering. And we talked about sukha and dukkha the last couple of weeks, so hopefully you get that distinction between pain and suffering. Those are the words I'm using to describe it, but you get the idea, the difference between just like, ow, a mosquito bite, and being like, am I going to get dengue fever? Right? Like, okay, what am I going to do? It's like this, when there's fear involved, and fear isn't necessarily bad, and actually suffering isn't necessarily bad, but once we see that fear is an ingredient that, unlike discomfort, which is just a part of life, but fear is an ingredient that we do have some say as about in terms of how it fits into our lives, because fear has to do with how we relate to things. I don't really get a choice about what stuff is in life. Kind of just how the human condition works. But I do actually have a choice as to how I have a relationship with the stuff that's put in front of me. And so this abundance mindset versus scarcity mindset is, it's not necessarily, it's about, abundance is actually about how we relate and how we experience it. I mean, there already is abundance. Like, we know that the world is vast with tons of resources. We know that the universe is, I mean, just, we cannot even fathom the vastness of this reality that we live in. We know that, like, factually. But then how do we experience abundance for ourselves? How can we relate to it all with abundance? I think we have some really unique challenges living in the culture that we do. A consumerist culture it relies on scarcity mentality to sell things. We're very, very entrenched in a scarcity mentality culture. And so we have these extra challenges. But the fact of the matter is, there's been these challenges for a long, long time. The Yoga Sutras is pretty old. People have been doing spiritual practice for a long time and talking about this stuff. So to me, it seems like there is this part of us that will naturally start to get competitive over immediate resources. And the way back to abundance for me is to see if I can let go into the possibility for just something different. I think I used to do a lot of spiritual bypassing, I think, meaning like wanting to be at a place in my spiritual journey that I'm not yet, and then kind of like faking that as my strategy for getting there. Sometimes it kind of works. But I used to do a lot of, like, when I wanted to feel abundance, right? I would chant, like you said, like we would chant to abundance, and I would really, really, really try to, I would do a lot of gratitude practice. Like, but I've learned now that gratitude is just a natural thing that it comes on its own at the end of any journey. It comes on its own at the end of any revelation. It comes on its own naturally. And what I was often trying to do is kind of like force it to be like, everything's so great, and thank you so much for how great it is and how abundant it is. And now where I tend to work instead was just, is there space here for something different than the scarcity? Acceptance. That's the first, that's our first phase of the transformation process. And really, anytime, and Lisa and I were talking about acceptance recently too, right? So like anytime we get stuck anywhere in the suffering square, anywhere, a really, really good simple inquiry is, what am I not accepting right now? And we can accept, it's also, don't mistake limitation for scarcity. Meaning like being here, I was like new limitations, right? Around like my space and all this stuff. But I also have like all this different kind of freedom. And so also being able to see, like, as you can come into deep, deep acceptance of whatever is coming up, whatever's going on, you'll start to see, you'll stop seeing the restraints as something that you need to fight against or try to control, if that makes sense. They become aids to freedom, actually, the limitations. I'm going to pivot to Pam's question, but let me know if that was helpful. I'm not sure if it was. Oh, and just like your direct question, what are we really asking for in our relationships when we ask for abundance? And I think what we're asking for is the ability for each of us to be on our own journey, for each of us to be vast and complicated and changeable. And I think we're asking to be in relationships that are authentic and that we can change the roles that we play, right? I keep using this phrase, authentic relationship. And what I mean is any relationship where every time we hang out, I'm going to play the savior and you're going to play the victim, okay? Like eventually I'm going to stop having play dates with you. It's not fun anymore. Like it means authenticity means abundance in our relationships. They have to come together because it means, what are we going to do today, friend? Right? How are we going to relate? And that we can have a lot of wisdom about what works for us in our relationship, but we also make that space for that other person to be so abundant that they surprise us sometimes. And for us to also be so abundant. Anger. I'm going to speak a little bit about anger. And someone was just recommending a book to me about women's anger in particular and the value of our anger. And I haven't read it yet, but I'm going to check it out and I'll pass it along if I like it or if it works for me. But who I have read, Audre Lorde, Black queer feminist teacher and activist and just incredible model human being, writes about women's anger as well, and that has been really impactful for me. So that's just a recommendation. Check her out, Audre Lorde. And just look up anger, and you can probably find one of her essays or talks about it. But what I'll say is, look, every emotion you have is valuable. You were given it for a reason. Like I said before, the stuff of the human condition, the stuff of life, you were given that. That was packed in on your way out the front door, like on your way into this world and this lifetime. The emotions are part of you, just like your limbs are part of you. You want them. How we relate to them is what's really important. When we don't relate to our emotional life with respect, it still will express itself. It just has to come out in weird ways. And so us learning how to acknowledge and validate our own feelings rather than try to control them. Trying to control them is trying to be the savior, which ends up really being kind of the villain, right? When we try to control our inner state like that, it ends up being repressive. It ends up creating ill health inside. And most of us find that there's and it's interesting, we kind of do this with our emotions, right? Like anger could be the villain, right? My compassion, when I feel it, could be the savior. We can villainize our emotions, right? And we can canonize some emotions, and we can do this whole kind of thing there too. But you might find, looking for yourself, that anger, and a lot of women do, and this is right, it's just a lot written about it, that anger in a woman especially is associated with these really bad, negative, villainous archetypes. And so you might find that it's a particularly difficult emotion to make peace with. I couldn't be in my anger at all. um, until I could. And it did come out funky at times. Um, so anger for me, well, just to finish that thought, I think that like these emotions, when we haven't been acknowledging them, when I was not adept with my anger. I didn't understand I didn't understand what it came to teach me. I didn't give it the time to learn. I repressed it. I did not know how to express it. When it came up, I was like, that's not me. That can't be me. That can't be me. That can't be me. What's wrong with it? Make it go away. When I finally started to admit that my anger had something important to say, by that point, it started to be expressed. I got to say, it wasn't really pretty. I wasn't very. It could be explosive. It could be, and I'm getting more adept with it now. But at first, it's important to have a safe space in certain relationships where you're allowed to learn how to express it and learn how to. I feel like with some of the stuff in me, I'm like a baby, like learning how to walk and learning how to talk. And so giving yourself safe spaces where you can learn how to inhabit these emotions is great. And I will say that what I've learned from anger for myself is that the anger has to, for me, has to do with usually my boundaries being crossed, and less so, but also sometimes my needs not getting met. And I haven't talked about this a lot, but it's like really, this is a really simple rule of thumb that you guys have probably heard before. But when we are talking about this stuff, using I statements is really, really helpful, because it's like, rather than like, you did this villainous thing, right? That's giving them the power. It's saying, I noticed my boundaries being crossed, or I noticed that I made this request and you ignored it, and so it's all coming from our center, our place of awareness. It's all coming from our inner reality. And it's coming from a place that nobody else gets to tell you what your needs and boundaries are. Nobody else gets to tell you how you feel. And so as long as you're expressing from that place, you're in alignment with truth, and you're not going, who's right, who's wrong. That's all story. It's all fantasy. The way that you feel is true and is right. And what I'm learning is that as I become so much better at understanding my needs and boundaries, I'm so much better at expressing them, which is uncomfortable sometimes. But as I get better at that and more skillful with that, the anger doesn't feel disruptive like it used to. And I can go, it happened the other day, actually. I woke up and I was mad at this person who'd come over, and I felt like it kind of like overstayed, or just, and I was like, and then in like a couple minutes, it went from villainizing this person to going, okay, so next time when that, somebody shows up, you say, look, I gotta start winding down for bed at 9, and just put that there, or like, and I just, learning how these little tiny simple things. And now that relationship doesn't have to be like, I'm mad at that guy, right? Like the relationship already kind of went right back to abundance, and went back to authenticity, went back to wholeness, back to each of us being on our journey and doing the best we can and learning. And we can bump into each other again, and maybe things look a little funky, and I'll have to go get a little angry and go figure it out, and then come back with more wisdom. But that anger comes up because something wasn't honored for you. And it's a sacred, sacred teacher that wants to protect you, that wants to take care of you. And sometimes it's those mama bear claws that come out and go, her. And that's the protector in that moment. Any last little questions? Thank you. And thank you so much for the questions, guys. I really appreciate those. Okay, I think that's it. This is the last big talk before. Oh, good, Lee, Rachel, thank you. I'm so glad it's helpful. Last big talk I'm going to give y'all for a couple weeks. There will be good, Judy. Oh, I'm glad it was helpful. Thank you. Um, yeah, I'm going to be on retreat. You guys are going to be meditating. I'm going to be posting over the next couple of days, also just kind of like pointing you guys to things that you can be checking out of mine over the next 2 weeks if you want more content. Um, I'm going to be cleaning up the coordinates a little bit today. And yeah, so you'll get more messages from me in the next couple of days. Tomorrow morning, we have a yoga and we have chanting and yoga after meditation if you want to join for that. And yeah, I think that wraps us up. Thank you so much, all of you. I learn a lot about authentic relationships and how to free myself and free others from us hanging out and spending time together. And I'm really grateful for it. Thank you.